Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. When you look at these last-minute Biden pardons, the big ones, Biden siblings, Fauci, January 6th committee.
That's right.
Most of the big ones have the same very neat signature. We would expect that probably to be the Autopen. There is one that looks different. It looks authentic. In fact, if you look at the last name, it almost looks like the president was having a hard time spelling his last name there. Is this White House of the opinion that the only pardon that would count is one that the president signed himself?
It's very interesting. Very interesting props. If you want to bring them to my office later so I can take a closer look, I would like to do that. The president is making a good point when he discusses the usage of the Autopen. Who was running the country for the past 4 years? Perhaps those documents were signed with the Autopen, something that this, I believe the Department of Justice is looking into. As you saw, Ed Martin made an announcement at the Department of Justice this morning to launch an investigation because the American people deserve answers.
Is there any concern that this president, who won the election on a promise to fix the economy and close the border, that focusing and scrutinizing these Biden pardons is looking into the past instead of looking forward? I
think in comparison to the amount of time this president has spent on securing the border, on fixing our economy, I just read out for you an entire list of economic accomplishments. Look at the border numbers. Look at the time and effort he's divulged into solving the global conflicts abroad. It pales in comparison, but it still, nevertheless, is a very important issue. And it was a huge issue that sent the president back to this White House. The Americans saw with their own eyes a mentally incompetent president, and they want answers for that, and the president believes they should have them.
And something that just crossed, Caroline, how mad do you think President Trump is going to be when he finds out that Elon Musk said, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it."
Look, the president already knows where Elon Musk stood on this bill. It doesn't change the president's opinion. This is one big, beautiful bill, and he's sticking to it.
All right, so Dana, we're in June. Yep. The election was a while ago. We had tacos. We have the Sons giving them advice. How do you think the Democrats are handling this?
I think this is a cue for producers everywhere, that this is a story we can do every day from now until the night of election night 2028, because they dug themselves such a deep hole on the issues that people care about the most. So inflation, still an issue, but getting a little bit better. But people are still reminded they've been paying higher prices since after COVID. You have the immigration issue. Every single day we are dealing with that, whether you can remember what happened at the border itself, or you have a situation like what happened in Boulder, Colorado with a visa overstayer. You have the fact that they spent so much time on climate change that they weren't dealing with the things that people really care about, jobs. And I would also add that the Democrats have continued to support the teachers' unions, while at the same time, America's kids cannot read and write or do basic math. And we are going into a situation where we're going to compete with China. With what? With the robots? I mean, that is a little bit insane. I do think that their big problem, to me, is that Tim Walz is their spokesperson. First of all, nobody could name the head of the DNC. Nobody could say who the head of the Democrats is. Nobody is emerging yet, and we are in June. And I don't see anybody emerging because Harold Ford Jr. refuses to throw his hat in the ring.
He emerges every day at 5 o'clock. Harold, your name was invoked. What would you like to say?
Table. It is good to be back at the table. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'll remind Democrats, as we think about this moment in the wilderness, and I tried to share a little bit of it yesterday, this happens after a presidential race. The losing party or the losing group has to figure out what they do differently and better. I'm old enough, mature enough to remember there was a time when I didn't think the Democrats would get back to the White House. In the 80s, you had Reagan. Late 80s, you had H.W. Bush to 92. And all of a sudden, this governor from Arkansas appeared and captured the imagination of the party. We have to remember he lost Iowa, lost New Hampshire. It wasn't until Super Tuesday that basically the biggest group, the most reliable group of voters in the Democratic Party, black voters, gave him victories in big states across the South and really rekindled his campaign. Republicans were out of control in the House of Representatives for 40 years, from 1952 to 1994, excuse me. And it took, or 40 years, it took Newt Gingrich and the contract with America to revive Republican relevance and when it comes to that kind of politics. In 2008, people thought after Obama that Republicans couldn't get organized, that Republicans didn't have a bench. Then your father-in-law came along and did something to the political system that upended it all. and we're seeing it now. Middle class and working class, reliable Democratic voters are now voting for a Republican. I would argue President Trump almost supersedes the political party system. He's a Republican, but he's bigger than that in many ways. That's the future of politics. He has ideas. I don't agree with all of your father-in-law's ideas, but I got to tell you, he has a way about him where if he thinks it's going to work, he'll stick with it. If he doesn't, he's willing to change and to adapt to what the country wants. We as Democrats have to understand that going back to the old ways won't work. We've talked on this show, tactics, spending money to figure out if we should do podcasts. Let's get a purpose again. Let's get a set of ideas again. You said it well the other day. Let's get a reason. And then you can think about the tactics. We are still smart on taxes and the economy and education. We just got to be bolder. And if we're not bold, we're going to be having this silly conversation for a much longer time than I want to.
Laura, he brought up flexibility, and that's always good to have when you're a politician sometimes. Why can't the Democrats be a little more flexible and listen to the voters and say, hey, maybe we're going to pivot back a little to the center?
That's a great question. And maybe Harold wants to opine on that. But look, I think the problem they're having right now is that there are two different groups within the Democrat Party, right? You have the people who want to be a little more reasonable, Harold, and then you have the very far left wing of the party that is very radical. And I don't think most Americans can align with that. And it turns out, I love to see the way they freak out over this new polling and over this new information that Americans like what they see with Donald Trump. I think for the first time in 20 years, 50% of the country thinks we're on the right track, thinks that things are going well in America, and they believe in this president. When you have gaslit people and lied to people like the Democrats did for really the past, 10 years with Donald Trump, but now you start to see the result. You see that inflation is going down. You see that we actually had a great result whenever it came to our trade deficit. We almost slashed it in half between the months of March and April. When things are moving in the right direction, Americans feel it. They can feel the restoration of this country. They can feel the strength of this country. They know the Republican Party is the one in charge right now doing it. And so I would love to have a little, counterbalance with some reasonable folks on the left, because I think that's the best thing for this country. We can all talk about things, but they're reasonable and they're not crazy anymore.
Greg, I know you like to really hash over these poll numbers. Take us on a deep dive, what you're seeing on these polls.
Well, first off, I want to say the tie is amazing and happy Pride Month.
Thank you very much. Happy
I'm
Pride
glad
Month,
he
America.
remembered. I sent it to him a few weeks ago. All right, so here's the problem. This is different. The damage is done. The Democrats always thrived on hoaxes, assuming that by the time the big lie would be exposed, whether it would be Russian collusion or the Fine People hoax, they already got what they needed. The emotional impact of the lie resonated. The truth didn't matter. It's based on that understanding that in working in the press office. The big story always lands on the front page. 2 weeks later, the corrections on page B7. Yeah. That's how it worked. The New York Times and the Washington Post still have their Pulitzers for the alleged Russian interference story, even though we know it's BS. But then something happened, and this is why it's so different. Tapper's book came out, and he deflates this hoax. But it was a hoax that we already knew, but his audience didn't. It was the first time that the correction didn't get buried in the back pages. Biden's infirmity is now more well-known than Biden himself. His name will never be separated from what happened. So the interesting thing, even more interesting than that, if you can imagine, the book didn't sell. That tells you everything. His audience, Jake's audience, was just informed that they were stupid, that they were gullible, that they just got taken. Who wants to buy that book? More important, who wants to be a part of that party that sold you that lie? I don't think there's any way you can walk back from this hoax the way you could with others, because it was played on your side, and the reveal is so spectacular. And the result is resentment, bitterness, disgust over the actions of a party who thought they could pull this off, assuming that the correction would be minor. Instead, it is huge, perhaps the biggest political scandal in history. Finally, in terms of politics in general, the brainwash has worn off. Trump didn't just make the red hats. He made the red pills. People now realize that the Dems have no truth, but just assigned opinions. Think about all of these opinions. Rich people bad, poor people good, Joe Biden fine, Trump, Hitler, George Floyd, a martyr, BLM, heroic, men can be women. These were assigned opinions. They came from committee. And once you're without these opinions, what's left? There's no structure, there's no unifying principle, there's no leader. That's what you're feeling. Trump realized this already because he was outside of politics, that for the past 40 years, all political opinions were assigned. You could be a Democrat. He was. You could be a Republican. He was. He is. So love him or hate him, he shattered this prism. There's no going back for Republicans and for Trumpers. Now it's the time for the Democrats to realize they've been suckered, that everything that they were told was assigned to them and not real.
Should we give Harold the red pill?
Yes.
We'll just put it in your
Tell him
drink,
it's a
Harold.
Flintstones vitamin.
Here you go. Chew it up.
It'll go down
Knock
well.
it back, Harold.
I like those blue pills you take better.
Meantime, a lot of people watch this. Pennsylvania Democrat Senator John Federman and Pennsylvania Republican Senator Dave McCormick meeting face-to-face in a forum on Fox Nation. Federman not afraid to make it clear that his party is failing to address some of the most important issues.
The rank anti-Semitism out of control. This is just rampant across all the universities, for all these places too. I mean, we really need to call it what it is. Building tent cities on a campus and terrorizing and intimidating Jewish students, that's not free speech. And now we've lost the argument in parts of my party. Our party did not handle the border appropriately. Look at the numbers. 267,000, 300,000 people showing up at our border. Now that's unacceptable, and that's national security issue, and that's chaos.
Former Democrat California Senate Leader Gloria Romero joins us on the program once again. Gloria, great to see you as always. Why can't more Democrats say exactly what John Federman said right there?
Well, let me first applaud Senator Federman as well as again to Senator McCormick, because they really do, I think, represent the shift from campaigning to governance and the commitment to work truly across the aisle. I wish more Democrats would do it, but sadly, Todd, Democrats are still caught in that web, the ideology of identity politics, and it has not yet taken root. They still stand up and scream that everybody's a Nazi, everybody's a racist, or still defend open borders, deny the rampant anti-Semitism, and refuse to stand up for America first. But hopefully with the Federman-McCormick discussion debate, I hope it really sends a message across the country that this is what the American people want, for our elected officials to grow up, to listen to each other and work with each other for Americans. That's what we want, and that's what they demonstrated.
I can't argue with that, but what I can never seem to wrap my head around is why Democrats, who, as you well know, you are part of the party, will literally do anything to get and maintain power, including changing longstanding voting laws. I can't understand why they refuse to take what really is the easy position on these issues, namely, terror is bad, and letting potential terrorists across our open borders is also bad. Why don't they just take the easy road and take the votes, Gloria?
I agree with you on that, and it is dumbfounding. And many of us tried for years to be voices of reform within the party, but so many others, like, Tulsi Gabbard and Leo Terrell and Bobby Kennedy, myself included, we finally just said, enough, we're gone, we're out of here. At a certain point, you can't keep beating yourself to try to change a party. I really believe the Democratic Party is on its last stand. It is a dying party. It will go the way of the Whigs in a century past. New Way Forward is an America First party, the Republican Party under Donald Trump, because I don't think this would have happened under a Romney or a McCain or others like the Bushes. This is really a new party, and it's one that recognizes that borders matter, citizenship matters, safety for all. We care about the content of one's character much more than we care about the color of our skin. And across the board, young and old, Latino, white, Jewish and Catholic, we are there together to say, stop the nonsense, speak common sense. And you know what, Democratic Party? Don't spend $20 million to learn how to talk to men. Just speak from the heart and speak from reality. My God, it's not that hard.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I still don't understand the $20 million to be like, talk football, golf, beer, being normal. But I also do wonder, despite what the experts say, if it is just a matter of time before John Federman goes full Gloria Romero and ditches the Democrats. We will watch and see if that happens. Meantime, want to get your thoughts on this. Democrats are underwater with Americans in the latest polls, and the media, Gloria, absolutely cannot believe it. Watch.
The party that is closest to your economic views. In November of 2023, it was the Republicans by 11 points. Now it's still within that range, still within that margin of error, plus 8-point advantage for the Republican Party. How is that possible, Democrats? How is that possible after all the recession fears, after the stock market's been doing all of this, after all the tariffs that Americans are against, and Republicans still hold an 8-point lead on the economy? Are you kidding me?
You know, Harry Enton, the guy who was gesticulating wildly there, and I went to the same college. It's almost like they offered a degree at Dartmouth on how to gesticulate wildly with your hands when you're on TV, but I digress. Could it be, Gloria, that was a joke at my own expense, could it be that despite the doom and gloom that the Trump economy is allegedly causing, according to the media, that the middle class actually likes what Trump is doing?
The economic policies are sound, and Americans see it. We're seeing it in our wallets. We're seeing it with our children. We're seeing it and we're listening to it as we also think about the future, a future debt, the need to drive it down, and what we want for our children and grandchildren. So it's not a surprise to me. But what we are seeing is with the legacy media, once called fake news, it still is there. I really do think that it has revealed to the American people that, quite frankly, the legacy media has basically been just an extension and arm of the Democratic Party. And that time is ending. You know, shows like yours, networks like yours, the rise of social media and independent podcasting, it really has become a challenge. So that wild gesticulation is going to be also a thing of the past as independent, true media rises up.
That's Gloria's way of saying, stop with the hand motions, Pyro, just chill it on out. But getting back to the substance of the issue, when you talk to people in America, how are you doing right now? Most of the people that I've spoken with have said, we're doing a lot better. Could be better. Anything could always be better, but we're doing better than we were last year. And I think that is so important. That shows why the numbers that CNN can't believe are what they are, despite the media, let's face it, probably rooting against Trump and rooting against those numbers. Gloria Romero, always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meantime,
Well, Fox News has learned that the Department of Justice is investigating the competency of former President Joe Biden, specifically when he issued pardons during the final days of his presidency, as well as the use of his Autopen in that endeavor. Now, Fox News has been told that the Justice Department pardon attorney, his name's Ed Martin, is reviewing a list of Biden-era pardons, and it is unclear what individual pardons are being reviewed by Martin's office. Here's what we do know. Back in December, Biden was criticized for commuting sentences for 37 of 40 federal inmates on death row. He also issued a preemptive pardon of his son, Hunter. Then in January, it was Inauguration Day, actually, Biden granted pardons to more members of his family, to General Mark Milley, to Dr. Anthony Fauci, Liz Cheney, and several other January 6th committee members. Now, Professor Yu, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 gives the president the power to pardon. And even Ed Martin, who is allegedly conducting this investigation, has said that's a plenary presidential power.
You caused me to pull this baby out and take a look at some things. Nice. I hear it's free.
Yes, yes.
Look, I wouldn't trust these Biden aides with DocuSign. Don't even ever respond to a DocuSign from these guys, not to mention the Autopen. But what this reminds us is the president makes a lot of important constitutional decisions, the pardon power, signing legislation. The only place the Constitution requires him to actually sign it is a bill. So all these other decisions, appointing ambassadors, issuing pardons, what's important is not did he sign it, but did President Biden make a conscious decision? And did anyone record it? So I think that actually makes it worse for the Biden aides and makes it even more compelling that we should have an investigation. Because one thing we'd say is, can Biden name any of these cop killers? Can he name any of the child murderers that he granted pardons to? Does he remember any of their names? Did any aide actually write down the names when he made the decision? If they can't show that, then what worries me is that these aides seized presidential power, are committing forgery, committing abuse of power, they should either be prosecuted by the Justice Department, and more importantly, Congress should have hearings, should have its own special counsel to figure out, do we need to have a different body rather than the cabinet decide whether a president has become incompetent and needs to be replaced?
So as you noted, it's not so much the use of the Autopen, it's did he make a decision with specificity for which that Autopen was used? Quick question, though, on that congressional investigation. The subpoenas went out, or excuse me, the voluntary kind letters, I call them, went out May 22nd requesting interviews. It's been more than a week. It's been almost 2 weeks. There have not been subpoenas, and that's in House Oversight Committee. Is there a case to be made for having a special congressional committee? Because 1 year from this month, the January 6th committee had done 1,000 depositions and interviews. So far, we have done 0 in this Congress.
I didn't know that, but that shows you the kind of urgency you could get if you had a full congressional special committee like Watergate, like Iran-Contra, and like January 6th, with the power of subpoena. If people don't show up and do the interviews, if they lie to the committee, then the Justice Department can and should throw them in jail. And that will get people off their butts and showing up in Congress. And why should these Biden aides even need a subpoena? They should be out in public saying, I did not commit forgery. I did not take advantage of, as Robert Hur said, a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory to abuse the power of the United States government. But they're not going to show up on their own, so they need to have a subpoena to force them.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, Emily, I want to play for you. This is Ed Martin, who's doing the investigation. Here are his thoughts on the pardon power.
No one, I think, with the standard of sort of reasonableness, thinks that what Joe Biden did at the end of his term was particularly reasonable. Now, I happen to think the pardon power is plenary. If you use the Autopen for a pardon power, I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. But the question is, how did this happen? Just like, by the way, many people said, well, wait, there's 1,500 January 6 pardons. How did that happen? These are big moments, and so they have to be able to withstand scrutiny. And I do think that the Biden pardons need some scrutiny.
So he's well aware of the nuances of the law, and his investigation seems to be quite detailed.
Yeah, and look what he's saying, plenary, meaning absolute. But the point is that it's not without scrutiny, to your point. And I think what's so alarming, first of all, I note that the mainstream media, again, called this unfounded. But the reality is that it's not so simple as the Autopen use. The point is the consciousness. And it was the president himself, Biden, who said he had no idea about one of the policies about which an Autopen was alleged to have been used. At one point, we know that he was verified out of the country. And so the issue becomes essentially like, OK, fine, if you delegate, that's one thing. But if it was someone else usurping presidential and executive authority, well, then that's a whole host of other issues, and it is frightening. And I note that if a president has a call, for example, with a foreign leader or whatever, what is it, 4 different versions? There's always a note taker. Everything is recorded. So for this plenary absolute power, for something that is so infinitely impactful with no room for the courts to intervene at all, then shouldn't there then be a record of that consciousness, of that thought process, right? For wills, we have to prove it up, down, and sideways. So why not for this absolute executive authority? Should we not rest assured that indeed it was the president and not his whole host of children that were around him and all of a sudden veering from all of his public comments about criminal justice, for example, up until then? Although we know that he's a definite sort of cabal family man for sure.
And Kennedy, you know, this is why this matters. It's not so much, you know, the Liz Cheneys and Mark Milley's and the political part of this. It's this. This is why this matters to me. Look at this. Louisiana child killer spared by Biden faces death penalty again on the state level after outrageous commutation. He killed children. And then you see another one down there, a serial killer, Jorge Torres, sentenced to several years for 2005 murder of 2 girls. These were child killers who were let out with pardons. And we need to know the consciousness of the president.
Well, yeah, and if this were something that Joe Biden ran on, then it might make sense with his political brand, but it really wasn't necessarily. You know, Trump was more of a criminal justice president during his first term than Biden was during his 4 years. And, you know, it's scary that with that absolute power, if someone is incapacitated, then that power can be corrupted. And that can put people at danger, obviously, if these people go out and reoffend. And the ability to change people's lives utterly deserves some accountability. So for everyone who's sitting on the bench during this discussion on the left,
you're not going to have a say at the end of the Trump presidency in 2028 when you think that the very same scrutiny should be applied to him and his family and whoever else receives pardons and commutations. Either we fix the whole system and we have accountability for every president, or you can shut the hell up in 3 years when your panties are going to be in a bundle because you're going to be preemptively mad at whatever President Trump does at that time with the power that the left has deemed absolute.
And Kayleigh, beyond just the pardon power, I mean, there's questions for immigration. There's a senior Biden official who told Alex Thompson, hey, there was an immigration plan. Biden said shut down the border. Where did that plan go? What a troubling question. Where did it go and who got rid of that plan?
Well, and that's why the investigation into the Autopen is so important, because even if the commutations and the pardons are ultimately held up as legal, investigating the use of the Autopen is going to maybe get us some names of the officials in the White House who were actually making decisions on Biden's behalf. And that's so important even from a political perspective. I mean, as voters, we should be deeply concerned that there is a political party in the United States right now that has no problem at all with installing what was essentially a figurehead that it could control with its puppet strings. And this is a pattern of behavior for the Democratic Party. Think about the way that they treated Kamala Harris as well. They installed her as the backup candidate after Biden dropped out without a single Democratic primary voter weighing in on that decision. And does anyone actually think that Kamala Harris would have been making the decisions had she won in November? Of course not. She was yet another puppet. So even if you're a Democrat, you should be concerned at the direction that your party is taking. Do you really want to be a part of a party that's going to treat you like that as well?
Yeah, and how do we stop this from happening again? We want to know the person we elected is actually the person making the decision.
It's time for Scen and Unseen, where we reveal the stories behind the headlines. For that, we turn to Fox News contributor Raymond Arroyo. All right, Raymond, the Biden decline that, of course, you covered for years on the show, we covered on The Angle, is now seeping into the consciousness, I think, of the mass media. But some Democrats now, I think, some of them still haven't gotten the memo.
Well, I know Bill Clinton is now writing fiction, Laura, but I think he's living in a fictional universe as well.
Did you ever have a moment with him where you thought maybe he was unfit to run for president? No.
I thought he was a good president. I had never seen him and walked away thinking he can't do this anymore. He was always on top of his brief.
You never saw any cognitive decline?
So I didn't know anything about any of this, and I haven't read the book. I saw President Biden not very long ago, and I thought he was in good shape.
Good shape.
Come on.
I'm worried that Clinton may be in mental decline now, Laura. I mean, how can he not see a diminished former president and a politically ambitious wife who may be pushing him to do things that he does? Oh, wait. Bill Clinton. Sorry. I can see why he might not see that.
Depends on what the meaning of the word shape is. I think good shape. He define it for us.
He did not have intellectual evaluations with that man. He didn't Okay. And Laura, talk about a trip to nowhere. Climate activist Greta Thunberg is now headed to Gaza. She's aboard a floating aid vessel, which they call a Freedom Flotilla, or as some might call it, the Hamas Come Across.
We are doing this because no matter what odds we are against, we have to keep trying, because the moment we stop trying is when we lose our humanity. And no matter how dangerous this mission is, it is nowhere near as dangerous as the silence of the entire world in the face of a live-streamed genocide.
How did she go from climate change to Gaza? Wasn't she doing climate change? Her repertoire keeps getting. Did she go on the the bow and say she was queen of the world, or what? Did she stretch her arms out on the?
The protest universe is expanding for Greta Thunberg, Laura. I mean, look, I will admit, these people do need aid, and they deserve aid. But at the same time, you have to have balance, okay? You're going in the middle of a war zone, and Hamas is still holding hostages.
Release the hostages,
if you're
bring in the
cry out for aid, you better cry out for hostages, too, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Now, YouTube Kitty star Miss Rachel, I understand, also standing with Hamas.
Leaders, be so ashamed of your silence. Be so ashamed of your anti-Palestinian racism. So ashamed that you don't see Palestinian people or their children as the same as us and our children.
Laura, why is everybody suddenly an activist? Now she's kitty care at the Foreign Relations Committee. No one wants to hear that from Miss Rachel. Mr. Rogers, in our day, he didn't start lecturing kids about Russia or Iran or the nuclear threat. That's not your job. And I worry. Everybody feels they have to get on the activist bandwagon now. Miss Rachel, you don't know anything about the Middle East, the Middle East, the Middle East. Maybe we have to just kind of, speak in her vernacular and she'll get the message.
But one of the things, this reminds me a lot of the George Floyd era where these celebrities felt, they tried to pressure everyone to post on social media. Even kids in schools around here were pressured. Have you posted anything yet? So that's kind of what's going on here. You're not a member of the club unless you've posted. I understand you have a Diddy update for us.
Yes, before we run out of time, after pardoning the Chrisleys last week, the president was asked by our Peter Doocy if he'd consider pardoning Sean Diddy Combs, who's facing federal sex and trafficking charges.
I haven't seen him. I haven't spoken to him in years. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, he sort of that relationship busted up. I don't know. I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me.
Now 50 Cent is saying, Laura, he will make sure Trump knows what Diddy really thinks of him and try to dissuade any pardon.
Yeah, stay away from that one.
I don't think this is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, he's disgusting. This is a disgusting. No, president's.
Well, the
he's
details
not going to
of
do
this
anything
case,
on that.
as Jamie Foxx said, he went from, show me the Benjamins to, show me the baby oil. So this is really a disgraceful case. And it gets more
not the
disgraceful
Benjamins.
by the day.
No. Yeah. All right, Raymond. Thank you very much. All right, that's it for us tonight. Make sure to follow me on social media. Remember, it is America now and forever. And Jesse Waters takes it from here.
Fox News alert. The Biden White House is under investigation. And Trump's got a new nickname for the big guy. He's now called the Autopen. Bondi and her team are investigating whether Biden was competent and whether others were taking advantage of him. Did the Autopen know what it was signing? The Autopen signed 8,000 pardons. But did Joe know? Was the pen going behind Joe's back and letting Hunter sign with it? Did Dr. Jill use the pen? Did donors? We're not sure. But we're finally going to get answers.
When you look at these last-minute Biden pardons, the big ones, Biden siblings, Fauci, January 6th committee.
That's right.
Most of the big ones have the same very neat signature. We would expect that probably to be the Autopen. Is this White House of the opinion that the only pardon that would count is one that the president signed himself?
The president is making a good point when he discusses the usage of the Autopen. Who was running the country for the past 4 years? Perhaps those documents were signed with the Autopen. As you saw, Ed Martin made an announcement at the Department of Justice this morning to launch an investigation because the American people deserve answers.
Donald Trump had his hand an inch from the Bible, about to be sworn in a second time. And the Autopen was on a pardon bender. The Heritage Foundation did their own investigation. Quote, "We gathered every document we could find with Biden's signature over the course of his presidency. All used the same Autopen signature, except for the announcement that the former president was dropping out of the race last year." Then they did a side-by-side. These are the signatures from Biden's final day. Pardons for the family, the J6 committee, Fauci, Milley, all neatly signed, identical. This 82-year-old's penmanship never wavered, not even a smidge. But this goes back decades. The Autopen was first used regularly by President Truman. He used it for simple stuff like thank you notes, nothing serious. Obama changed that. Barry had a portable Autopen that he used in Europe to sign major legislation. First time a machine ever signed an actual bill. The pen was the best kept secret in the Oval. It lives in the White House, typically in the Office of Presidential Records. How does it work? Simple. The president gives a thumbs up, the doc gets stacked, Autopen goes to work, and then a final verification. W's Justice Department codified it. They said, yeah, Autopen counts, but one catch. Quote, we emphasize that we are not suggesting the president may delegate the decision to approve and sign a bill. Only that, having made this decision, he may direct a subordinate to affix the president's signature on the bill. The big question, did Biden direct someone to sign his name or not? Or did aides have free rein? Speaker Johnson says Biden was out of the loop.
Sir, why did you pause LNG exports to Europe? Like, I don't understand, liquefied natural gas is in great demand by our allies. Why would you do that? Because you understand, we just talked about Ukraine. You understand you're fueling Vladimir Putin's war machine because they got to get their gas from him, And he looks at me, stunned with this, and he said, I didn't do that. And I said, Mr. President, yes, you did. It was an executive order, 3 weeks ago. And he goes, no, I didn't do that. And he's arguing with me. He genuinely did not know what he had signed.
Even Biden's West Wing knew the Autopen was the real chief. 2 former White House sources said a top Biden aide may have gone rogue, using the Autopen like it was their own magic wand. Crypto czar David Sachs says Pocahontas wielded the wand.
What the Biden administration was doing, and let's face it, it wasn't Biden. Elizabeth Warren controlled the Autopen during that administration. She, for some reason, has this pathological hatred of the crypto community. She wants to drive this community offshore. She doesn't want it happening in the United States. That's the wrong policy for the United States.
If Biden didn't approve the use of the Autopen for a certain order, then that's forgery. It's falsifying a federal document. That's a major felony. Also, if the president isn't competent to be president, then he's not competent to use the Autopen. All the books, all the videos, all the chaos we saw for 4 years could be used as evidence to prove he wasn't competent. Investigators should be looking at emails from White House insiders discussing Autopen protocol. A smoking gun document or a whistleblower could blow the whole thing wide open and invalidate pardons, executive orders, even legislation. Simone Sanders was there, but don't you dare ask her about a pen that ran the country.
I have to ask who's actually making the decisions. Who is actually running the country? Everybody wants to say Joe Biden wasn't running the country. I know for a fact he not only read his presidential daily brief, he was engaged in the meeting, he asked questions, and he gave directives. Donald Trump won't even bother to read the iPad.
Yeah, Simone knows better. No one thinks Trump needs a CAT scan. Biden's the one who got lost in a closet. Jake Tapper, he already confessed and cashed in on the truth. And since he did, CNN has to cover the Autopen investigation, right? They better if he's talking like this.
Somebody asked me, I forget who it was, but somebody asked me, was there an effect when Fox News covered something about Biden that you would revulse from it? And actually, it was the exact opposite. I would be like, what is this? What is this point? What happened? What happened? What happened? I had the opposite effect, but I think you're right that is a phenomenon. Oh, Fox is covering it. It must be false. And that's not the case.
Yeah, no kidding. We don't write books to break news. That's why we have TV shows. We tell the truth right away. All these tell-alls aren't helping the media's credibility. They made it worse. Their ratings look like border crossings, way down. And now the knives are out. MSNBC wants to burn Tapper's book in a bonfire.
No huge banners on the cable news network that recently devoted itself to the issue of presidential mental acuity. That network did not dare devote itself to the mental acuity of Donald Trump. That network decided that the mental acuity of Joe Biden last year is a more important story now. No one at that network suggested that Joe Biden was ever incapable of doing the job of president. Their critique of Joe Biden is that he was incapable of delivering a sharp and polished television debate performance, which would have been true of every single president prior to John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
That's Lawrence O'Donnell. The guy, he needed a vacation, remember, 50 days into Trump's term because he was exhausted. Maybe he should take a cognitive test. Hey, your rules, not mine. The machine's never been weaker. When there's fighting between MSNBC and CNN, we've divided and conquered. Joy Reid, she has her own war stories. She says Comcast tried to put parental controls on her phone.
Once I got to, NBC, and I too joined Twitter back in 2000. I think I joined in 08 or 09, and the bosses were horrified. And anytime I would tweet anything, I would get calls. I would get, please get off Twitter. We hate it. They just, they don't like that it pulls their talent and their reporters out of their control, because now you're not running what you're tweeting through standards and practices. It's giving your personality directly to the audience, which they don't like because it's no longer managed and curated by them. And they don't want people breaking news.
Comcast wasn't worried Joy was going to break news. They were worried she was going to blame the Jews. If Democrats were smart, they'd treat their machine like a Tesla and firebomb it and build back better. It's the only way to cure TDS.
There's a divide between what I would say two teams in the Democratic Party. There's team restraint and team resistance, right? There are those in team resistance who feel like we should react hysterically to everything that Donald Trump says or does. And then there are those who feel like we should pick and choose our battles and be strategic. But I worry that the momentum is on the side of hysterical, hyperbolic resistance, and the enormous expenditure of time and energy and resistance might crowd out the restructuring and moderation that needs to happen within the Democratic Party.
Good luck. Nobody believes a Democrat anymore. Half the party just confessed to the crime of the century, and the other half's having margaritas with MS-13. When you're hooked on TDS harder than Irish Rosie on Xanax, an Autopen investigation is not what the doctor ordered. They're going to need a united front once the subpoenas start flying.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.